Before leaving Islam, questioning Muslims typically start diligently studying the religion like they never did before. It is that process of learning more about Islam that leads many of us to become ex-Muslims. It is knowledge, not ignorance, that destroys our faith. Hey everybody, Secular Spirit here, and this December is Ex-Muslim Awareness Month, a time where ex-Muslims share the challenges they face in leaving Islam, and beyond that, try to normalize the act of leaving Islam. Part of the challenge of leaving Islam is that Muslims have a lot of misconceptions about why ex-Muslims have left and what they believe or don't believe now. To the Muslims watching this video, I know you think that ex-Muslims are confused and misguided, lying to others and maybe to themselves about what true Islam is. I'm here to tell you that isn't the case. To prove my point, I've collected 6 of the most common misconceptions about ex-Muslims that I've found online, and I'll explain exactly what they get wrong. So let's get started. Number 1. Ex-Muslims leave Islam for emotional reasons. This claim comes up in comments from Muslims when they watch videos of ex-Muslims sharing their life experiences that led them to leave Islam. In many instances, ex-Muslims endured abuse, verbal and physical, from other Muslims in their community, and often from family members. This is particularly true for ex-Muslim women who've had their physical appearance and major life decisions like marriage controlled and decided for them. Muslims will say things like, "You left Islam because you had bad parents who beat you," or "You left Islam because the imam in your community was abusive." The conclusion you're supposed to reach is that these ex-Muslims' reasons for leaving had nothing to do with Islam. It had to do with anger and trauma from the sinful actions of bad Muslims. With this line of thinking, the ex-Muslims' criticisms of Islam can be dismissed as being purely emotional and, from the Muslims' perspective, completely irrational. Here's the first problem with this claim. It's incredibly reductive. No one decision is ever purely rational or purely emotional. It's always a combination of both. Many ex-Muslims like myself came from families that weren't abusive, but still left because they realized they didn't have rational reasons for belief. I left Islam for a combination of emotional and rational reasons. Islam didn't comfort me in the face of life's big questions, like why do bad things happen, and how to cope with the fact that we all will die one day. And when I honestly examined the evidence for Islam's answers to those questions, like the existence of an invisible God in heaven, I realized I actually believed them due to irrational blind faith. This claim also shows a fundamental misunderstanding of ex-Muslims' experiences. Yes, in many instances, we have suffered at the hands of individual Muslims, but the key is to look into why those Muslims have abused ex-Muslims. What you'll find is that the reasons are typically rooted in Islamic teachings. If we look at the example of bad parents, that is so easily dismissed as not having anything to do with Islam, punishing a daughter for having sex outside of marriage, or for just having a boyfriend, is rooted in Islam. The same goes for abusing a daughter for not wearing a hijab or niqab or burqa, or beating a relative or neighbor because they came out as gay or trans. There are some Muslims who will say that those abusive Muslims are wrong, that judgment is only with God. But where did those teachings to believe that those things are horribly bad sins come from, if not from Islam? In other words, would those Muslims have abused those ex-Muslims if they weren't taught to have those beliefs through Islam? And this is why many ex-Muslims leave, because they've directly experienced the harms of the religion's teachings. Number 2, ex-Muslims leave Islam because they want to be free to sin. So according to this narrative, I left Islam because I wanted to be free to drink alcohol, to have casual sex outside of marriage, to eat pork, to steal, so on and so forth. And in the case of LGBTQ ex-Muslims, well, they left Islam so they could express their sexuality without any guilt. Underlying this claim is the belief that ex-Muslims no longer have anything to stop them from doing bad things. But when it comes to things like theft or sexual assault, ex-Muslims don't need Islam to understand that these things are wrong. From their perspective, they're not wrong because God says so. They're wrong because they harm other people. And we live in a society where we function better without harming others. Ex-Muslims don't leave because they want to sin. It's because they see the harm in forcing obedience through the threat of God's punishment. Especially since some things that are considered sins, like drinking alcohol or having sex outside of marriage, aren't actually bad, or at the very least aren't bad in moderation. Ex-Muslims stop believing in God and don't suddenly become nihilists or selfish hedonists. They do have different values now that they've left Islam, but the vast majority are still people who care about their loved ones and community, just like they did when they were Muslim. Number 3, ex-Muslims leave Islam because they've been corrupted by the West. Muslims will see someone like me, a former believer who left Islam within a year of moving from the Middle East to Canada, and they'll think, oh well, it's so obvious what happened here. He was seduced by the liberal lifestyle in the West, where alcohol and casual sex is rampant, where traditional family values have been trashed in favor of woke politics and gender pronouns, where you can demand that others identify you as a giraffe or whatever. They'll also say that I've succumbed to Western propaganda designed to divide Muslims and to assimilate them into the West. Lies about Muhammad being a pedophile or that Islam is misogynistic. But here's the reality. Yes, it's true that the West is more liberal and that things like sex and marriage are not as restrictive. In the freer and more tolerant environment of Canada, I did question Islam. Not because I was corrupted, but because I finally had the space to think about things for myself, to consider the possibility that Islam isn't true, and to honestly investigate why I believed it was true. I also got access to new information I wasn't aware of or that was concealed from me when I lived in the Middle East. For example, I learned in school that Muhammad had married Aisha, but the detail they omitted in the lesson was that he married her when she was 6 years old. I'll let you come to your own conclusions on why that detail of Muhammad's story might have been omitted. Here's the main takeaway. I became an ex-Muslim because I realized there was no good evidence for Islam's truth, and I learned more about its harms. Not because I swallowed some anti-Muslim propaganda and some alcohol. Number 4. Ex-Muslims leave Islam because they don't understand it. Muslims will say, once again, that ex-Muslims don't know the true Islam and are instead listening to inaccurate Western propaganda about it. For example, they'll say it was normal back in the 7th century for a middle-aged man like Muhammad to marry a 6-year-old, or some will even say that she was actually 18, not 6. Others will say that the slavery condoned in the Quran isn't as bad as the slavery we know today, or that slavery was only allowed in the context of taking war captives as a merciful alternative to executing or imprisoning them. Here's the thing though, ex-Muslims more often than not have already looked into all these things. Before leaving Islam, questioning Muslims typically start diligently studying the religion like they never did before, mainly in the desperate hope that somehow they can maintain their faith and get rid of all those doubts. It is that process of learning more about Islam that leads many of us to become ex-Muslims. It is knowledge, not ignorance, that destroys our faith. For example, discovering that there are multiple hadiths accepted by Islamic scholars that confirm that Muhammad married a 6-year-old, and understanding that while that may have been the norm then, when the Prophet Muhammad is presented as the ideal template of a good man today, it is clear that his actions definitely shouldn't be emulated, or at the very least, they need to be very, very carefully cherry-picked. And yet, that still won't satisfy some Muslims who will say, we ex-Muslims need to study more, or even become scholars in the classical Arabic the Quran was written in, to absorb its true perfect meaning. To answer that, I want to give a shout out to fellow ex-Muslim Veiled Rose for this quote. To join Islam, you just have to say the one sentence of the Shahada, the testimony of faith, out loud. But to leave Islam, you need to have a PhD in the subject. And I think that quote says it all. Number 5, ex-Muslims are hung up on Islam because they still believe. Ever see God's Not Dead, perhaps the greatest bad movie of all time? In it, a Christian student advocates for belief in God against an arrogant and cruel atheist professor. Spoiler for those who haven't watched it, and you must for the abundance of unintentionally hilarious cringe moments. But the twist in the end, right before the atheist professor is fatally maimed in a car accident, the twist is that it turns out he took up this whole anti-religion crusade because he was angry at God for taking his mother through cancer. And this mentality is imposed on ex-Muslims too. Why else would we still be talking about Islam? In my case, 17 years after leaving it. It has to be because part of me still believes and wants to ease my guilt for sinning, or wants to vent my anger at God because I've suffered in life. But there's another reason we still talk about Islam. Even if we've left it, most of our relatives and community have not. So Islam still impacts us directly, particularly those of us who hide our apostasy, who could be disowned or even killed for leaving Islam. And then there's ex-Muslims who are still dealing with the traumas of Islam's teachings. I'd say every ex-Muslim has experienced some trauma from being Muslim. I'd even say that's true for all Muslims. And those wounds don't heal overnight. Sometimes they never heal. Talking about the harms of Islam and warning others about its harms is a way to try and heal and to help prevent the suffering of others. It doesn't come from a place of still believing. Number 6. Ex-Muslims use Islam as a scapegoat for their problems in life. Some Muslims see ex-Muslims as whiners or losers stuck in the past, obsessed with beating up on a religion that in their eyes provides peace, love, and community to hundreds of millions of people. Why do ex-Muslims do this? Those Muslims will say that they do it because they had a rough family life, perhaps for reasons we explained earlier, or their career isn't going well, or they're lonely and can't find a partner. Why take responsibility for yourself when you can just say you've been traumatized by Islam, right? But try to look at it from the ex-Muslim's perspective. You might disagree with their reasons, but these Muslims no longer believe. And it might have cost them their family and safety, or it might have led to them leading a double life, hiding the truth from everyone else. Of course then, Islam is connected to problems in their lives. It's not easy to move on from those problems when Islam is still a dominant force in your life. And it's not easy to just pretend you're Muslim or hide your true feelings, to just suck it up and live a lie, without that causing damage too. This ties into another argument that ex-Muslims like me online are grifters looking to make money by bashing Islam. Believe me, there are much easier subjects to make money besides talking about Islam or religion in general. But as much as I enjoy funny cat videos, I do this work not because it will give me untold riches, but because Islam claims to answer the biggest questions in life while presenting no good evidence and simultaneously instilling harmful teachings that make us look at life as this game where we need to rack up enough good points to get a prize of a heaven that we need to take on faith exists. This profound harm is what motivates me to do this channel. But the most important reason I talk about Islam is this. I'm here to speak for ex-Muslims that can't, out of fear for their safety. More than anything else, this video is for you out there watching, and Ex-Muslim Awareness Month is for you too. And that's all from me. If you want to support ex-Muslims and spread awareness, please like this video and share it with non-Muslims and Muslims who might not know about our experiences and our challenges. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can also support this channel through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the description below. I'm Secular Spirit, and I'll be back with another video very soon.